Welcome to our Race to Erase MS Forum. I'm Claudia Curry-Hill, and I've lived with primary progressive MS for over 35 years. 30 years ago, I had been living in Aspen, Colorado for about a year, and I heard that there was going to be a fundraising event for MS. So I excitedly volunteered to help. Someone called me and said, since you've lived with MS longer than most of the people we know, would I moderate a panel for a few doctors? And Nancy Davis and Dr. Howard Weiner were on that panel. And that's where I met Nancy and learned of her vision of the Center Without Walls. So the Center Without Walls program is funded by the Race to Erase MS and has provided support that has permitted the medical community to link together multidisciplinary scientific programs and expertise across the country to advance the understanding of the cause of MS and to develop new treatments. The center is a breakthrough success because of the vision, insight, and flexibility of these extraordinary doctors. I would like to introduce you to our Center Without Walls program panelists. Dr. Liliane Amascua, USC. Dr. Peter Calabresi, Johns Hopkins. Dr. Adam Kaplan, President of Mara Pharmaceutical and Adjunct Faculty, Johns Hopkins. Dr. Aaron Longbreak, Yale. Dr. Nancy Sykott, Cedars-Sinai. Dr. Rhonda Voskuil, UCLA. Dr. Emmanuel Wabant, our Race to Erase MS Medical Director, and she's from UCSF. Dr. Howard Weiner, Harvard. Dr. Lindsay Wellscroft, Oregon Health Sciences University. And Mark Barondis, a respected civil trial advocate and co-founding partner of the law firm Miller Barondis LLP. Mr. Barondis has represented many high-profile clients, including award-winning actors, musicians, and sports legends and politicians. Nancy Davis, founder of the Race to Erase MS, dedicated philanthropist, jewelry and clothing designer, and devoted wife and mother of 5. It is my pleasure to introduce our founder, Nancy Davis, to kick off our panel discussion. Nancy?
Thank you, Claudia. So since the very beginning, we did our first event in Aspen, and I met Claudia, and I'm so grateful for Claudia being here every single year since we began and moderating this panel and doing giving it the brilliance that only Claudia can. So thank you, Claudia. It's 30 years since we started Race to Erase MS, 31 years since I was diagnosed with MS. Boy, have things changed. They would not have changed without this incredibly brilliant team of doctors. They are the dream team that you could only imagine, that if you could have this, it's a miracle. That's what it is. They are superheroes in every sense of the word, and I am so grateful that I'm even sitting here with all of them in this room. And if you knew how brilliant and innovative and incredible each one of these people are, you'll see that so much is happening for those who have MS. They are your best friend. They are fighting hard every day, coming up with most brilliant new ideas, and so grateful to have them. When we started Race to Erase MS, I was a terrified person. I was told I should go home and go to bed, and I would never walk again. And the most that I could look forward to in my life was operating the remote control of my TV set. And I was a young mom at that time with 3 kids, and I was devastated to think my life was over and I would sort of have no purpose or do anything important on this earth. And it upset me. I thought if I go to enough doctors to get second opinions, someone in fact tell me I do not have MS. I got the second opinions. Unfortunately, everyone told me I had MS, but along the way I found out that the best and the brightest doctors were doing a lot of the same research. And I thought if we could create a panel so we have the best and the brightest work as a team to never duplicate research, but to constantly be able to communicate and learn off each other's, trials and different things that are happening on a constant basis, we would come up with something quicker. Everybody told me that idea was impossible. It would never happen. However, as you see today, this is what 30 years looks like. There are 25 drugs on the market to stop the progression of MS. I don't know if you notice, but every year, another drug seems to get FDA approval. That's a miracle. For us to get FDA approval on the first drug was a miracle. To think that 25 have come in and are helping so many people, it's a miracle. But we have a long ways to go, obviously. For people newly diagnosed with MS, it's a great, bright future. There's options, there's things you can do. And this wouldn't happen without this team. So I'm thankful for Race to Race MS. I'm thankful for all of you. Incredibly thankful for this team of doctors to work in a very different way and to really help. So thank you for being here. And I hope in 30 years from now, we forget that MS ever existed. So that would be my dream.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce the first person to speak on our panel, Mark Barondis, who's going to talk about living with MS.
Good morning. It was 23 years ago that I heard the abbreviation MS from a doctor. I now sit before you today as a 62-year-old man, someone who knows the daily challenges of living with my secondary progressive MS. In fact, it was only this week that I was in Cedars-Sinai Hospital, discharged from a several-day stay as a result of a virus that aggravated my MS. I'm still experiencing it right now, neuritis. It's all over my skin, such that the clothes I'm wearing right now actually hurt me. But don't worry, I'm not taking off my clothes. They will remain on for the majority of my talk. And Nancy, thank you for taking us to the emergency room.
I know.
It was Nancy Davis that drove me to the emergency room from the middle of a dinner. So thank you very much.
You messed
for
the
doing
dinner up so bad, but no, I'm so happy you got good care.
So MS is a disease that affects more women than men. In fact, only about a third of the MS cases are men. For me, it's been a journey that's tested my body, it's tested my mind, and my spirit. But here's the one thing, it hasn't defeated me, and it's not going to defeat you either.
Right.
Living with MS is like embarking on an unpredictable adventure. Some days it feels like I'm walking through a minefield, never knowing what the next symptom's going to be. Fatigue can grip you like a weight and drag you down. But remember this, we always have within us that inner strength, and that inner strength will lift you back up. MS feels like a silent thief, slowly robbing us at times of our physical abilities. The simplest tasks for me can become challenging mountains, as muscle weakness, coordination, tripping, my drop foot, they all take hold. But here's the secret. Again, we're stronger than what we think. We have resilience within all of us, and we can overcome any obstacle, even the ones that MS throw our way. There's still moments where sadness or depression can seep into our souls. And it's perfectly okay to acknowledge those feelings. We can't let them consume us, though. But if we feel that it's happening, it's perfectly okay to reach out and seek help. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. And when I get those dark feelings, and I do get them, I'd reach out for help. And that help has saved me. Remember that we're not alone in this battle. Remember to reach out to others that are around you, seek support from loved ones, and connect with the vibrant MS community, such as the Race to Race MS and the community surrounding it. I do want to invoke one point of personal privilege here to thank my beautiful wife, Rose. for all you do to keep me healthy and as sane as humanly possible. And that's not an easy task, believe me. I also want to thank two of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Peter Calabresi, and at the opposite end of the table, Dr. Adam Kaplan. If there is ever two people in the world that realize what a pain in the ass I am, these gentlemen do. So while we navigate this journey, I want to take a moment also to thank Nancy Davis and voice my sincere appreciation to the incredible doctors around me for their ongoing research into the race to erase MS. Every day, these brilliant minds are dedicated and working tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of this disease for all of us. And they really are our unsung heroes. We owe them a great debt of gratitude. And to all those doctors on the panel that I didn't get a chance to personally voice my appreciation, thank you very much for everything that you do. And I say that from the very bottom of my spine. I'll continue to support all of you in your research efforts, attempt to raise awareness, and be part of the solution. And all of you can help as well. Together, we really will make a difference. And to my other MS brothers and sisters in the room, and those that are not in the room with us, I want to express to you that you should surround yourself with love and positivity. They're powerful weapons against the challenges that we face. Believe in yourself and your ability to overcome. Let it shine as a beacon for others walking a similar path. Remember, we're not defined by our diagnosis. We're defined by our resilience, our courage, and our unwavering determination. I urge all of you to rise above your own limitations, embrace life with open arms, and let's show the world that MS may be part of our story, but not define our spirit. And to the doctors around me, let's try to change what MS stands for. With your collective genius and collaboration with the Center Without Walls, MS should soon stand for Mystery Solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Ouch.
Now we're going to move on to our MS updates. So first speaking on Epstein-Barr virus and MS is Dr. Erin Longbreak from Yale.
Thank you, Claudia. So for many, many decades, we've been looking for what causes MS, what triggers it to start. And Epstein-Barr virus came into the picture and was proposed as a virus that might trigger the disease many years ago, actually. So we've known for a long time that people with MS were more likely to be infected with EBV than people who didn't have MS. But when you looked at the numbers, it was essentially 100% of people with MS were infected with EBV and 95% of the rest of the world was infected with EBV. So it didn't help us out a whole lot, and we were unable to determine causality and a lot of things like that. Last year, Dr. Alberto Echerio's group out of Harvard came out with a really lovely study which gave better confidence that EBV may in fact be a causal organism for MS. And he was able to take advantage of some really interesting and unique data that's collected by the military. In the military, when you join, they take your blood and they store it. And they keep very close dibs on you for a very long time thereafter. They don't lose track of their members. And so we can learn from these service members about this kind of before and after. So they looked at millions of service members. They found a few hundred that developed MS during their time in the military. And of those hundreds, they winnowed it down to about 30 who, at the time they joined the military, had never been exposed to EBV. And at the time that they got MS, they had EBV in almost all cases. They were able to say that people who developed MS had about a 32-fold higher chance, that EBV increased the risk of getting MS by about 30-fold. And the cool thing about their study was not only did they associate just the seroconversion from negative to positive, but they also showed that at the time people seroconverted or went from negative to positive, they'd been exposed to EBV. The people who had MS also started releasing, they were able to detect increased blood levels of something called neurofilament, which is a marker of nerve damage. And that happened at the same time, around the same time that they got exposed to the EBV, that they had exposure to that. And so that increased the confidence that not only was the virus associated with MS, but it gave more confidence to say that there might be a causal relationship as well. So we do more and more think that EBV probably is associated with risk of getting MS, but there's still a lot to be learned. So it could be associated with MS in a number of different ways. It may just trigger the immune system to go awry, to go off the rails and become autoreactive. And so it may be related to a one-time event that when you get infected, that your immune system starts to go haywire as a result of that infection. But EBV is a virus that also hangs out in certain immune cells for the rest of your life once you've been exposed to it. So there are some thoughts that, well, is it involved in ongoing relapses? Is it involved in ongoing progression? And so how EBV is related to MS is not yet known, and there are a lot of ongoing research studies that are trying to tease that out. Additionally, there's a number of drug companies that are currently trying to develop a vaccine against EBV, and so there's lots of conversations about how can we take advantage of these vaccination and these vaccination trials to see whether those people who are vaccinated may not get MS. What does that change the risk of MS developing many years later? Obviously, this is a long game. Most people get infected with EBV when they're children. And so this is a decades-long experiment to see what the outcomes of these vaccines are going to be. But I think it's really exciting and gives us a lot of place to build from.
Excuse me. So next on the list is MS treatment, personalizing approaches to MS. Dr. Lindsay Wallace-Croft from OHSU.
Thank you for having me today to talk about this. I think that we all know that MS is a really complex disease and it manifests so differently for different people. So I think that that's one of the privileges and the challenges as a neurologist treating mostly people with MS is understanding how to personalize the diagnosis and the follow-up and the treatment approaches for people with MS. But I think that when we think about how we personalize approaches for people with MS, I think we think about it in maybe three broad categories. One is how we can really personalize that diagnosis, how we follow up patients, and then what treatments and what therapies we give them after their diagnosis. And I think that there's been a lot of research and recognition that a lot of the inflammation that happens with MS occurs around the blood vessels. And actually on MRI, we are able to see that these MS lesions are kind of centered around these blood vessels, and that happens more commonly in MS than maybe some other conditions that can cause brain lesions, like migraines or vascular diseases like high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And so potentially, by looking at the percentage of brain lesions that have these vessels running through them, we can more accurately identify and diagnose MS in relevant patients, along with our other tools like lumbar punctures or spinal taps and serial MRIs across time. I think some of our other panelists are also going to be talking about different emerging blood biomarkers that we have for MS. So Dr. Weiner looks like he's going to be discussing that a little bit later. And I think that there's a lot of promise in that to be able to more accurately see how aggressive someone's disease may be and potentially be able to help decide appropriate treatments and people's response to different therapies. But I think one of the real exciting parts, as Nancy mentioned earlier, is that we have so many different treatments available for folks now that can really help tailor us to give the right medication to the right person at the right time. And I feel like we have highly effective treatment therapies now that can really help prevent disease that are also administered in different ways that improve access for patients. I think it can be really challenging to either get to infusion sites, especially for people in rural populations. So there's therapies now that can be given in both injectable forms that can be administered at home, as well as in an infusion center. And I think having these options to be able to discuss with patients can really help put them at the center of their care, which is, I think, one of the most rewarding things about, treating patients with MS in this era. But I think another really exciting aspect to this is like all of the research that's being done about lifestyle changes and things that people can do to affect their health outside of the medications that are available just prescribed by physicians. So this can include tailored exercise approaches or research into diets or even other supplements that really give people ownership and an ability to kind of help modify their disease. Because I think we're finding more and more that a healthy diet, especially one that's limiting processed foods, and maybe even using strategies like the Mediterranean diet or even studies with intermittent fasting are really getting more and more interest. And I think maybe an important part of MS care, along with regular exercise and really minimizing other kind of risk factors like smoking, which we know can make MS worse. So, I say to my patients, there's no good time to get diagnosed with a disease like this, but I think we have a lot more to talk about and advise and things to offer now. And so I think that, and research from all of the people here have really moved that field forward.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace-Kraft. And the new hot topic around is AI. So next on the list is artificial intelligence and healthcare with Dr. Nancy Sykott and Dr. Adam Kaplan.
Well, Dr. Kaplan and I are going to be a tag teaming here, and he's going to give the initial discussion, and then I'm going to give some more specifics. So, Dr. Kaplan.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm going to try to go quickly because artificial intelligence turns out to be a pretty big topic. Those people who know me know I like to start off with a joke. So, son asks his father, why does he speak so softly at home? And the father replies, because you never know when there's artificial intelligence listening to what you say. The son laughs, the father laughs, Alexa and Siri laugh. So what is ChatGPT? This is what came out in November of last year and has kind of taken AI to a new level. GPT stands for Generative Pre-Training Transformer, and not enough time here to go into the details, even the ones that I understand, but essentially it is trained on an enormous amount of data from the internet and elsewhere. It knows how to break it down and decode it into what is for computers words and then recode it in a way that it spits it out. But I think ChatGPT says it best when I asked what it does. It says ChatGPT generates responses based on the sequences and patterns it has learned. And it's telling on itself here. It doesn't understand words or have beliefs in the same way that humans do. It's simply predicting what comes next in a sequence based on patterns it has learned during extensive training. So it literally knows it asks itself, what is the next word statistically that fits best in the context of where things are going. So what are the strengths and vulnerabilities? Well, what is it not good at? It's not up to date. So the last training of ChatGPT was September of 2021. If you want more current information, you're going to have to wait till the next training. It doesn't do complex reasoning or decision making. It's not reliably correct, and it doesn't fact check itself when it makes these sort of crazy predictions. Horses have 3 eyes and this kind of stuff, because it's not good at common sense, because there's not a lot of common sense on the internet, right? We assume we know a lot of stuff. That they're called hallucinations is what the computer geeks have decided to name it. What does it do well? It's extremely good at summarizing and synthesizing even large amounts of data. It can be a source of information, explanation, simplification, education, and integration. What are the caveats, why we're here today, about applying ChatGPT to healthcare? Well, it's not ready to field patient and family questions by itself. It can be used as sort of a starting point. You cannot be sure if the answers are correct, even though it gives them with great confidence. And there should be transparency, which unfortunately there isn't, where it says, look, ChatGPT is simulating compassion, empathy, and understanding. It doesn't understand those concepts any more than, your toaster oven does. So, ChatGPT, however, is a work in progress. It will get better. So what does the future hold? Well, patients should know that, and family members, that a consultant is coming to a computer near you, which will be able to provide information about diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment plan, as well as, and presumably eventually better than your doctor does. So what do physicians have in store? Well, I would say we should start now to adapt to the evolving landscape. And I think the 4 C's of what we can still do that computers will never be able to do: compassion, communication, collaboration, and championing the advocacy for our patients. Should we be worried about AI? I'll leave that to Nancy. That's an impossible question. If there's a question and answer about that, happy to field that. So I just want to close with an example of ChatGPT and what it can do. So I went to ChatGPT and I typed in the following. I said, utilize the following information, and I pasted a People magazine article for 2022 about yours truly here, Nancy Davis. I said, write a 1-paragraph speech I can give about Nancy Davis on the occasion of the 30th anniversary and include these facts. And I just put in some facts. And here's what ChatGPT has to say to Nancy. Today we gather to celebrate 30 years of the Race to Erase MS Foundation and to honor its founder, Nancy Davis, a woman of incredible bravery and dedication. Having battled MS herself for 3 decades, Nancy has used her own adversity to become a beacon of hope, tirelessly advocating for those affected by MS and substance use disorders through her foundations. Beyond her philanthropic work, she is a dedicated mother, wife, and friend who imparts wisdom and her own experiences and leads by example. Through her efforts, she and her foundation has raised over $55 million. Again, I'm not sure if it's hallucination or is that, enough, because I'm sure it's...
I love that AI, but they're off by 1 million.
Okay, see, you can't be sure. For critical research, giving hope to millions. Congratulations and thank you, Nancy, says the ChatGPT. So that is pretty good, right? Wow. So just in
You have
closing,
to send me that. I love that.
I will happily. I'll have ChatGPT.
AI's fabulous, right?
Yeah. So better than I could have done. But so in any case, just to close, scientists predict that human-level artificial intelligence will be obtained by 2040, but maybe sooner if the bar keeps dropping. So we'll have to see how things go in our ability to keep up with the changing times.
Love that.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that's going to be hard to follow. Thank you, Adam, for that amazing overview. So I think we see the power, but also maybe the peril in this AI revolution that we're experiencing right now. And I'm going to give you a couple of very specific examples of how this technology will be used and is being used in the healthcare field. So I'm going to start with radiology, because I think this is one of the areas that it seems very fertile for the use of these kinds of techniques, which really, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, as Adam was saying, it's taking information that's already there and training it. But part of it depends on how you organize the information. And as they like to say, garbage in and garbage out. And we can see that some of these training modules or training processes can lead to incorrect information, biased information. So at least in the medical field, it starts with expert opinion and a training set. So somebody has to go in and take this information and vet it. So for the imaging standpoint, I think you heard that Dr. Wolliscraft was talking about the new biomarker, the central vein sign that we've been using to better diagnose MS. So that requires going through and looking at all of the lesions that are in the brain and identifying those that have the central vein sign. While your neuroradiologist, who gets paid, time is money, it doesn't have the time to go through and do that. So one of the ways that we will be, and is being developed, is artificial intelligence to actually go through those scans and identify those and then present that information to the radiologist, which will be fantastic. This kind of approach for radiology is actually being used and proposed for radiology. In fact, I was listening to a podcast about AI that was very frightening, actually, which I won't go into all the details, but one of the predictions was that radiologists would be out of business by now, that they would no longer exist because the computers would have, AI would have taken over. So obviously that's not the case, but you can see how you could use this information as a powerful tool to extend the expertise. The other area that I think is very exciting is because these systems can be trained to differentiate different kinds of patient groups. For example, here's an MS patient who did very well and is living with MS and is thriving. Here's another patient with MS who's not doing well. What's the difference between them? So we could look at those, we can analyze those, but this kind of system could actually identify novel differences between these two groups, for example, at things that we don't see with the human eye, but because of the computational abilities of the technology could differentiate that. So that may give us new insights into disease progression, for example, allow us to predict how people are going to do beforehand, so they could be predictive. So I see a lot of promise in that. The other area where it's being used is because we generate all of this information now through the electronic medical record. And so these techniques can be used to actually go in and extract information from that EMR and then come up with new hypotheses or create new data from that information in a way that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves as researchers. So I think that it gives us a tool. It's like any new technology. It gives us a tool to use. It can be misused, and for any of you who are interested in, if you listen to The Daily from the New York Times, there's a whole podcast about one of the founders of AI who is actually very nervous about where things are going and how these systems could be potentially weaponized. But I think in the MS world, we'll be using these techniques to better understand the disease and also to make to make better diagnoses and prognosis for patients who are living with MS. So we'll see what the future has to offer, but it will be exciting, and this is definitely going to be something that we'll be talking about for the years to come. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sykott and Dr. Kaplan. So next is MS treatment in underrepresented populations. Dr. Liliana Amascua from USC.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm going to start off by basically defining what we mean by underrepresented populations. So for many decades, we've believed that MS is a disease primarily in white people of Northern European background. And so populations, those that identify, for example, as Black, African American, Latino, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, we've known very little about how MS affects them, what are their risk factors, how do they respond to treatment. In fact, actually, in 2014, we published the first review looking at how these populations were represented in overall MS research. And we found that only 1% of all the literature ever written about them was really 1%. So not too long ago, again, we looked at how many of these populations are represented in the treatments that we do have today for multiple sclerosis. And astonishingly, again, we found that less than 10%. So we are here today with over 20 treatments, and so what we've done is basically looked at all of these clinical trials to try to better understand what the representation has been. And so there's multiple studies that suggest that, of course, probably these treatments do work, so I don't want you to think that these treatments do not work, but what we do want is better representation. And so one of the first treatments to look at is ocrelizumab. And this ocrelizumab study called CHIMES was developed over the last several years to look at how it works in those that identified as Black or Hispanic background. And what we are finding out is that indeed there are very important baseline characteristics that are slightly different. And one of the things that we have seen just observationally is that in many cases these populations may have certain risk factors that basically increases their risk of having higher disability, in fact also higher mortality. One of our studies had looked at people who have MS, what are the trends in mortality? And looking between 1999 and 2015, we looked at those trends and we found that, for example, Black males particularly were dying of MS before age 45. So that is certainly a huge thing that we want to erase. We don't understand the reasons, but one of the things that we need to better understand is how MS affects them. And if we don't have that knowledge, we can't move forward. Well, not all is lost, because definitely in the last several years we have increased that attention to these populations. And CHIMES is one of those one of those studies that is going to show us a lot more about not just how the treatment works, if it's working. We do have a good idea that this treatment is working really well, particularly because there's observational studies that probably B-cell is a much more important player in these populations, whether it's because of the exposures that they've experienced from environmental to social conditions. But we are trying to better understand that, not just by looking at imaging, but also biomarkers. Aaron Longbraid mentioned NFL. NFL will also be looked at. So we're really, really excited about that. But nevertheless, what I would say is that in order for us to improve that representation of these populations, we need them to also participate in research, because in general, these populations are not represented also because they're either not being asked or because there's fears. And one of the things that we've worked with MSAA, which is Amanda sitting over there, was to talk about myth-busting, issues about what research is and how one can participate. So I think going forward, what I would like to see is where I can say MS treatment in once underrepresented populations, so not, and we wouldn't even have to say underrepresentation anymore.
Thank you, Dr. Amascua. And next, under MS research updates, existing drugs and new drugs, a guide to DMTs, Dr. Emmanuel Babban, UCSF.
Good morning. This is a big topic to cover, so I'll try to be brief because there are now more than 25 medications to prevent progression of MS on the market. And as you've heard, this has been a transformational field compared to other neurology fields. So we're very happy to be part of this very positive adventure of advancing treatment. When we think about treatments for MS, we think about treatments that prevent flares of MS, new scars on the MRI, or treatments that may slow down the progression of disability. We have many drugs that are on the market now that are preventing flares and new scars on the MRI, and as a result, they prevent progression of disability. But we have very few drugs that actually prevent disability once it starts progressing insidiously. And that's really a huge field of research right now. When we think about treatment, we think about the way they are administered, whether they are subcutaneous injections, whether they are IV drips, whether they are pills. But we can think also about medications based on how strongly they prevent flares of MS. And not everybody has to be on the most effective treatment, because there are lots of different severities or activity of MS, and it's really a discussion with your neurologist to pick what's best for you. In the so what's in the pipeline? I think what's in the pipeline is very exciting. There are medications that have a completely new mechanism of action. We have, so as you've known, with the existing treatment, there's interferon, there's glatiramer acetate, then there's medication we call S1P modulators. So in each family of these drugs, there's several members. We have fumaric acid, we have anti-CD20 agents, and then we have natalizumab, which is in a different category. We have cladribine in a different category and alemtuzumab in a different category. So some families still have only one member, but there's a lot of companies working to improve the tolerability, for example, of these medication and put new agents on the market in these families. But the new families of medication that are on the horizon are including something you may have heard about called BTK inhibitors that are preventing inflammation in a different way the other medication already on the market are doing. These drugs are probably, of all the drugs that are currently under development, the ones closest to an answer whether these drugs will make it to through the FDA approval once the trials are over. These drugs are tested not only in relapsing MS, but also in progressive MS to see whether for patients who don't have relapses, whether they are able to prevent slow progression of disability. Another category of medications that are being tested, but maybe a little behind the BTK inhibitors, is the CD40 ligand. That is a drug that is tested in relapsing MS, but also in progressive MS. Again, the idea is to prevent kind of inflammation. So lots of the drugs we're using, or most of the drugs we're using, are actually targeting inflammation. There are different strategies also trying to develop medications or treatment that target EBV. And there's at least one trial based on that strategy. There is in this room several people who are leading trials with new strategies. Dr. Weiner has a strategy of nasal anti-CD3 treatment for MS, and maybe he wants to mention something about that. I'm leading a treatment of purely progressive MS with a drug called N-acetylcysteine. That's a trial funded by the Department of Defense. So there's lots of different things that are happening that are very exciting, and I think there's also a lot of emphasis on drugs, and Dr. Calabrese can talk about that, strategies for remyelination and repair. So very exciting times, despite already having a very busy market for drugs for MS.
Thank you, Dr. Wabang. So next to talk to us about restoration, repair, and rehabilitation, Dr. Peter Calabrese, Johns Hopkins.
Good morning. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Nancy. 30 years, it's really amazing. And thank you all for coming. Seriously, one of the motivations for me when I was in my neurology training to go into MS was the MS community was so engaged. I was so taken by young people who were diagnosed with the disease and wanted to learn more, wanted to participate, be part of the research. And so we actually learned from you all about your experiences. And one of the things that's motivated me to believe that we can repair and remyelinate is that I see people sometimes paradoxically get better or have good days. There's some people who I have patients who tell me they are mostly in a wheelchair, but they will have days where they can get up and walk across the kitchen. How does that happen? That doesn't happen in spinal cord injury. So the nerves are probably still intact enough to conduct the impulses, and there can be changes, I believe, that will facilitate that increase in function. So the goal of my research right now is to figure out how to make that happen for everyone in a more consistent manner rather than just once. So 30 years ago, I was just finishing my neurology training, starting out at the National Institutes of Health doing research. We were very focused on inflammation, but inflammation in the blood, the T cells and B cells, and we were the beneficiaries of research for 2 decades before that, in the 1970s and 80s, smart people studying how those T cells activate, how they traffic from the blood into the brain, and that led to all the therapies that started coming out in the 90s and the early part of the millennium. But around 2005, we realized that we were not fixing all of the problems. These drugs only really worked for the relapsing forms of the disease, and for progressive MS, we needed something different. And so we started with the Tissue Repair Project. We and other people around the world have been working on this for a while. And the good news is that a lot of progress has been made. I think there's a perception that, well, nothing's really happening in progressive. And I know it's incredibly frustrating when I see people suffering. I find it very frustrating. It motivates me to go back to my lab people and say, we got to work harder, we have to work faster. Nancy told us yesterday, it's a race, remember? and it actually kind of shook me up too. It is. We need to work harder and faster. So we can't wait. People are suffering. So we're trying very hard. Of course, science is challenging, and we sometimes they call it research because you search and then you research, right? But and even Einstein said, 99% of the time I'm wrong and 1% have an inspirational thought. And sometimes I feel that way. But, if you keep trying, you get there. And so I think we're going to get there. There is evidence that there is myelin repair when we look at tissues of persons who have lived with MS, that some people have myelin repair and do remarkably well. So it can happen. I really believe that. Why is it not happening with the drugs we have? Well, they're predominantly targeting the kind of inflammation that Dr. Wobon was talking about. It's mostly the circulating immune cells in the blood that come from your spleen and lymph nodes. Now we recognize that there's a different kind of inflammation in the brain. Some of the brain cells themselves that we call glia, because we thought they were glue cells that just held the nerves together, actually can act as kind of an immune cell. And so microglia, astroglia, and even the oligodendroglia, the ones that are supposed to be making myelin, can take on an aberrant function and actually be part of that chronic smoldering inflammation. You see that some of the drug companies have picked up this sort of notion of smoldering inflammation. So I like, some of you may know from years past, that I like the metaphor of MS in the relapsing stages being a forest fire. Flames, trees are on fire, all heck is breaking loose. And we now have ways of having helicopters come in and dump monoclonal antibodies on and put out that fire. But it doesn't put out the smoldering embers and inflammation. And that's what we have to get at. And we didn't, I think, really appreciate for a while that there was a whole nother type of cell and targets that we needed to get to. We need to get our drugs into the brain, and then we need to identify new targets on the astrocytes and microglia that we can go after. The good news is that there are some amazing technologies that allow us to identify these targets. There's a technology called single-cell RNA-seq, and what that basically means is that we can look inside every cell and figure out the RNA programming of that cell. It's like asking cell by cell, what are you up to? What are you doing? And it turns out some of the cells are still doing good things, and we call them homeostatic cells, and they're trying desperately to maintain function. And then there are other cells that have gone awry and are really, they think there's an infection in the brain or some foreign toxin, and they're reacting in a very injurious fashion to the healthy cells. And so we don't want to just kill all of the microglia or all of the astrocytes. We want to be more selective and targeted. And we're starting to understand through this technology which are the messages that are coding for proteins that are bad and which ones are good, and we can manipulate those in the lab and test the hypothesis and say, okay, for example, we found that part of the immune system called complement component C3 is expressed very highly by the astrocytes, and those astrocytes seem to kill neurons and the myelin-making cells, the oligodendrocytes. And so we can now knock that out of the cells and ask what happens. And lo and behold, in the animal models, things do better. The cells survive longer. And interestingly, C3 inhibitors are being tested in humans, and one was just approved for macular degeneration, which is a dying of nerves in the back of the eye. So, and there's another complement inhibitor, eculizumab, is approved for neuromyelitis optica. So this is looking like a really promising area. Bunch of other targets. We have a diversified portfolio, so although we try to stay focused with research projects, we have to, it takes a lot of people, smart people studying different pathways, because I don't want to find out 5 or 10 years from now that I was barking up the wrong tree, or it only helps 1% of people. I really want to find something that helps everyone. One of the really exciting things is that some of these pathways are actually in common with other neurodegenerative diseases. So we see the same signatures in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and we're starting to work with those folks. I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago in British Columbia, Canada, which is one of the Keystone Symposia, where it was a great meeting because it was not just MS folks in an echo box talking to each other about the same things, but we were talking to Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's experts, seeing what they're doing, comparing notes. They're asking us, how do we get so many therapies? Because they don't have a lot of therapies, but they have actually made a lot of progress with imaging and biomarkers. And so I think this kind of crosstalk is something that we really do. And of course, Nancy realized that 30 years ago, that getting smart people together to compare notes and make sure that there's not redundancy, get stuff out there before it's published is really the way to go. So it's an exciting time. I think there is definitely hope, and the message I want to convey to you all is that the groundwork has been laid. What I told you about the 70s and 80s leading to the therapies in the 90s, we've been at this now really since 2000, and so the last 20 years have identified lots of targets. We're much smarter. We actually now are developing drugs that get into the brain that will test these hypotheses, and something's bound to work. I really think we're just on the precipice of getting something that will repair the damage. Rehabilitation, that's something you can do right now. I know it's hard, tired, it's painful, but there's a lot of evidence that wellness approach, as you've already heard, from diet, sleep, exercise, as much as you can, keep up the fight. Mark has been an amazing example. I don't know how he continues to do so many things, and Nancy, it's just, ow. Yeah, thanks. But so many of you are really, it's the little fights every day, getting up and dealing with what you deal with, and everyone has a different battle, right? It's, sometimes it's the silent MS, and people can't see it. It's that 3 o'clock cognitive fog where you just can't even understand what anyone's saying to you, and sometimes it's the reality of getting into your chair again. And so we all have different fights and battles in the world, but I think that, as you heard earlier, it's really important just to have that spirit and inner drive to keep at it. And honestly, when I see people fighting it, that really motivates me. Like, as doctors, when we try to care for people living with MS, you have to care for the people, and when I get to know the people that I care for, and I want to know about their lives and what's happening, and that's really motivating for me. So thank you all for coming out and listening to us today.
Thank you, Dr. Calabresi.
That's great.
And next, on aging with MS is Dr. Rhonda Voskal, UCLA.
Thank you, and thank you, Nancy, for all that you're doing. So I'm going to speak about aging in MS. The reason I'm going to do this is because all the treatments that we have target relapsing or remitting MS. Primarily, they target the immune cells, and there aren't very many treatments at all for progressive MS, and even those don't target the brain. They target immune cells. So why do I tie this in with aging? And that is because what we've done is we've tried to take things that we know are important in MS, and it's a clinical observation, and we tried to relate this to finding a new treatment. In that regard, what's known is that, well, I'll say what was thought before was that when people went from relapsing or remitting to secondary progressive MS, it was related to disease duration. So if they'd had it for 5 years, well, actually 10 to 15 years, that's when they would go from relapsing or remitting to progressive. Well, actually, further analysis of that data by many groups showed that it's actually not so much disease duration that leads to this transition to this progressive disability phase. What it is aging. There's something bad about becoming the middle-aged time period, around 50s. This is bad for MS. So we began to ask, well, why could that be? And I think to understand aging in MS, you have to understand aging during health. So what happens during aging during health? Well, actually, there's actually immune senescence. It's not a pro-inflammatory situation. Older people are more likely to get infections and cancers. There's immune senescence. But what happens with the brain? Well, the brain has neurodegeneration. Even during health, there's brain atrophy. People have cognitive decline. They have balance problems. They have walking issues. The brain undergoes neurodegeneration even during health. So now we can imagine an MS patient who's having some of these neurodegenerative aspects of their disease. You can now figure, well, of course they get worse with age. They get worse with aging, right? So what we did next was we said, well, let's look at the MS population and see if it's true. And sure enough, that is what happens. So when people go through this transition from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive with aging, it's not like they suddenly get more enhancing lesions. It's not like they suddenly get more relapses. What happens to MS patients with aging is they have actually fewer relapses and they have disability. And on MRI, it's not new enhancing lesions, it's actually atrophy, specifically in some areas more than others, that align with aging. What can we do about it? Well, there's no easy fix for aging. And should we give up? Well, no, we shouldn't. Because maybe there are some things we can change. For example, what about the loss of hormones with menopause and andropause? Estrogens are known to be neuroprotective. Testosterone is converted to estrogen in the brain. So how is it good to lose something as basic as these robust sex hormones when we're young and to just lose them, particularly in menopause? Menopause, estrogen decreases so rapidly at the age of about 51. Suddenly the brain is just completely deficient of estrogen. This is not good, and the world has now begun to do research in menopause and MS, and they found that menopausal women with MS have worse disability accumulation. So it's their same disabilities, they get worse. And another paper by a group in UCSD showed that there can be worse brain atrophy with menopause. So this presents a very ideal opportunity to go in and find a designer estrogen, not what's usually been used. We've done an estrogen through trials in MS patients that were not menopausal, and we found that there can be beneficial effects on brain atrophy and improving cognition. So to finish up, I'll just say that one of the ways Race to Race MS really helps the things we've done at UCLA is that it's provided pilot funding for trials and basic research to look at aging and the effect of age and sex on the MS model with implications for the MS patients. And to that end, I'll say, actually, last week, we just got a new grant from the National Institutes of Health for $7.2 million to study the effect of age and sex in the MS model. And it's going to lead to amazing things because we're doing the kinds of things. We're looking at gene expression across the brain from region to region, the cognitive region, the walking region, the balance region. What are the genes that are expressed in these cells and how's it affected by age, by sex, by menopause, by andropause? So we're going to find targets and we're going to go in and treat them and reverse them. And the last thing I'll say is we also, based on the support we had, we were able to put in a grant to the NIH for a very large trial, 7 sites across the United States. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to treat menopausal women with an estrogen, a designer estrogen for that, to try to prevent brain atrophy and cognitive decline with menopause.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you, Dr. Vasco. And last but definitely not least is Dr. Howard Weiner, and he's going to speak to us about biomarkers through blood tests instead of MRI.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, Nancy.
Hello, how are you? But can I interrupt 1 second? I see that, I think Maureen, they're here, if people have questions and you could, yeah, if you guys are filling out questions, I'll bring them up, and so we'll get to that lightning round and get your questions answered. But here's Dr. Weiner.
That's
Sorry.
okay. So before, I'm going to talk about biomarkers, and then I'm going to talk about our new nasal spray, and then I'll end up, since we're in Hollywood, talking a little bit about movies. But let me start by talking about Nancy and the Race to Erase MS. This is the 30th year. I was there at the very first year. I was born and raised in Colorado, okay? In Colorado, we ski. I was a skier, okay? I'm a better doctor than ski racer, but I did try to ski race. And that's where the race started, because we had a ski race, and you were supposed to come in a cowboy hat. So we were wearing cowboy hats, and we were racing down the mountain. And I just want to congratulate Nancy and thank Nancy for all you've done all these years.
Thank you for being there since the very, very first year. I remember that.
I'm never going away. And so I'll tell you another little personal story. So I was born and raised in Colorado. My family owned a deli in Denver called the Bagel Deli. And as Nancy knows, her father had a pretty big appetite, right? And he used to order from my parents' deli, okay? Then they moved to California. So my parents said, when Marvin Davis moved to California, our profits went down. So I'm happy to report that the profits are back up. The deli was actually just awarded one of the best pastrami sandwiches in the country, okay, in Denver, Colorado. So when you're there, please visit the Bagel Deli. Let's talk about blood biomarkers, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the, Dr. Waband referred to this nasal spray that we're working on. We want to be able to understand what goes on in the brain in MS, but you can't do biopsies of the brain. You can do MRIs and other imaging, but it isn't that easy to do it. So we have new biomarkers that are being developed. One of them is called NFL, not the National Football League, neurofilament light, and that gets released when nerve cells are damaged, so we can measure that. There's another blood biomarker called GFAP, glial fibrillary acidic protein. It comes from astrocytes in the brain, and that's more in patients who are progressive. And we're now beginning to use that in our studies. And then to lead off what Dr. Sykott and Adam and Dr. Calabrese talked about, with AI, we can look at very, very complex patterns. And one of the things that we're looking at is the difference between relapsing disease and progressive disease. And when people become progressive and you can't see anything on the MRI, can we find a signature in the blood? So we're just doing work now where we do this single-cell RNA-seq. Single-cell RNA-seq is where you take 10,000 cells, and each cell you look at 30,000 genes in each cell. So you can do the math, right? 10,000 cells, 30,000 genes in each cell. I mean, I can't analyze that, but with computational studies, with AI, and Dr. Sykott talked about radiology looking at lesions, as we get more pictures of all these gene patterns, we'll be able to put them into a program and tell you what stage of disease you are and how and where you be treated. The other thing I would say is when we come up with these patterns, and it's a lot of data, we deposit these patterns in a biorepository in the cloud. Of course, the cloud isn't in the cloud, it's in buildings in Oklahoma and things like that. And then you can ask AI to figure that out. So I think that these blood tests are going to be very important. So that's blood biomarkers in MS. And I think the big question is relapsing disease versus progressive disease, and understanding that with blood biomarkers. We have a study called the CLIMB study, where we follow people over time. Many of the centers here have studies where they're following patients over time. So if you're asked to participate and give blood samples, give a blood sample. It can be stored, and then it can be used. So now I'll talk a little bit about something I spoke about at the scientific symposium yesterday. One of the things we've been working on for a number of years is a nasal spray for MS based on animal work. And it's a monoclonal antibody that we spray in the nose. And we found that it helps the animal model of progressive MS. They don't progress as much. And it affects the microglia and the astrocytes in the brain. So we had good results. So over the last couple of years, we started doing it in MS patients. So far, we've treated 6 patients. That's not a lot, but you got to start somewhere. And I showed the data, and it's encouraging. You have to be careful when it's only 6 patients, but they tolerated it well. Some of them were feeling better, and we saw changes in the brain PET scanning. So based on this, we're now going to go forward with a double-blind trial. That's what you have to do, where people will get 1 of 2 doses or a placebo. And we hope to start it next year sometime. If it works, it'll take about a year. Then we can go on to a bigger trial. And I'm happy to report that we're talking here at the Race to Race MS, and at Yale and at Hopkins, we're all going to participate together to work together in testing this new drug, and then if it works, then we can expand it to other centers. So we're very excited about that. I'll end with the movies. My son is in the entertainment industry. He's an Emmy Award-winning writer. He wrote for 30 Rock in Silicon Valley. He was just on an Amy Schumer show and sang some of his songs. His father took after his son a little bit. So I made a couple of movies, so I'm allowed to push my movies here. I don't make any money on them. But I made one movie that's called What is Life? And you can get that on YouTube. And I talk about life's big questions and interview one of my MS patients on that. The other movie I made is called Abe and Phil's Last Poker Game. You can get that on Amazon. It starred Martin Landau, an Academy Award-winning actor, and Paul Sorvino. So it was a lot of fun making that, and it deals with life and how we deal with it. So I share that with you. I'll end where I started, and that's with Nancy. We're all here because of her, her courage, her not giving up, her support of everything we do. And so, Nancy, thank you again. And we're all happy to be here to help race against MS. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Weiner. Okay, now for the exciting part of our program, we're going to the lightning round to answer the collected questions we have.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with some of the questions that were asked online. So for Dr. Woolscroft, we had a question about if you needed to stop taking Vumerity due to a low lymphocyte count, what would you or could be your next option? I used to be on Copaxone, but stopped due to pain and fear of injections.
I think that that's a great question and really speaks to some of the personalization that we have to do for each patient. It's a little difficult to say, not knowing someone's individual disease activity and also if they've had any kind of infectious complications from those low lymphocyte counts. I think that it's really just a great conversation to have with each individual provider and patient, especially considering a lot of different factors. I mean, how easy is it to take a regular daily medication versus like a less frequent infusion? Are there any considerations about pregnancy planning or anything else? So I don't know if I can provide specific medical advice, but I think that, you know, really exploring your own priorities about your risk tolerance for you know, the infections and side effects, understanding what you value, understanding what you can actually realistically stick to with a disease that poses many challenges and many demands on your personal life and your family, I think is really important. So that way you can be the best advocate for yourself or your loved one that might be making these really difficult choices.
Thank you. Next question for Dr. Calabrese. When will remyelination drugs be available for MS patients?
So I've been doing this long enough to know not to make promises for the reasons I mentioned, that we search and search and sometimes have to research. So it's not something that we can just project out like a business plan. It's going to be 10 years. Of course, I want it to be now or next year. And that's, I go to work every day hoping for that. But reality is that sometimes problems in life are challenging and we don't give up. So I would say that it's similar to what the title of one of Howard's books, that we're curing MS. And we have some people who have responded to the treatments we have in a very, very positive way and have regained function. In fact, there's MRI evidence that some of the people who go on monoclonal antibody therapy appear to have myelin repair, at least by imaging techniques. And so I would say that, you know, some of it's happening right now. Some of it will happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And like cancer, there will always be a small subset that eludes us and we'll still need to do better for. So it's a continuum, I think.
Thank you. Next question is when will BTK inhibitors be available for MS patients? And we hope that in the best case scenario, 2 years from now, we'll have something FDA approved. Next question for Dr. Amezcua. Why does MS affect African Americans and Hispanic more progressively? What genes make the disease progress faster and more debilitating? Will they have to take a higher dose of their treatment to compensate for their progression?
So very loaded question and very important question. So yes, indeed, what we do see is that this population has what we think is a higher burden of disease. In many cases, we still don't understand, but what we do see is that there are some important players that, to consider. One is diagnostic delays. Delays in the start of their treatment can increase, of course, disability. And the other ones include, for example, environmental factors such as perhaps, cardiovascular morbidities have been shown to be associated with worsening of disease, and these can be quite prevalent in this population. There's also some, from the types of studies looking at genetics and looking at their diversity, particularly related to risk of developing MS. There has been some, information in terms of their HLA that, probably puts them at, at higher risk also of developing MS, but also some associated with risk of progression. We're still trying to better understand the population. Like I mentioned, they're heavily underrepresented, and so we do want to better understand so we can actually start treating, particularly the modifiable factors. And if modifiable factor is as easy as if we can diagnose them much earlier and get them started on treatment, then we can start delaying that progression disability in these patients.
Thank you. Next question for Dr. Weiner. I wanted to know when a cure will come about for MS. Will it happen in my lifetime? I'm 53-year-old. Please let me know what a cure will look like for MS.
So this is it's actually not a silly question. It's a very important question. As Peter said, almost 20 years ago, I wrote a book called Curing MS. And because everyone wants to know when there's a cure, so what I decided to do is I was writing my book because many of my patients would say to me, as they say to all of the doctors here, "Hey doc, when will there be a cure?" I mean, we always hear that. So what I did is I turned the question around and said to the patient, "What do you mean by a cure?" Okay? And as I collected the responses, it was clear that there were 3 definitions of a cure by people who had MS, okay? One was, I get MS, and the progression is stopped, and it never goes any farther, okay? So that's a type of a cure. And I think we are curing MS now in many, many people. I think there's many people who get MS at the beginning of the disease. We treat them, and we keep them on their medicine, and they don't progress. I can tell you many stories. A young woman who came to see me about ready to get married, what's going to happen to me, et cetera, et cetera. We treated her. We stopped her disease. She has a family of 3 boys. They come to see me. I see them every year. It's very hard with the 3 boys in the examining room, but we somehow ever get through it. And I think we've kind of cured her disease. Now, then I had another woman who said to me, "Yeah, but if I have to still take medicine, I'm not cured." That's not a cure if I still have to take medicine. So I don't know how soon it will be that we could treat somebody and then not have to take any medicine. That's a type of a cure. Although we're beginning to study whether you need to stay on your medicines. But we're not happy to take people off their medicines right away. The third cure is somebody who has disability, and their disability is improved. Someone who can't walk as well or whatever. And then they're cured because their nervous system functions better. And this is what Dr. Calabrese was talking about. This is very tough, and I don't see that happening so soon. But as we learn more about the nervous system and how it works and how we might rebuild it, et cetera, that may one day happen. And the third or final cure is MS never happens. Nobody ever gets it, okay? And we're learning enough about the disease that one day we may be able to do something about that. Some people think if you vaccinate against EBV virus, maybe no one will get MS. Some people think if you do something to the microbiome, which is the bacteria in the gut, no one will get MS. And we're getting ready to do some of those trials. And I would predict that in a couple hundred years from now, I have a feeling I'm not going to be here, but I will be with Nancy up there. We'll be looking down. She'll probably be doing events in heaven. I don't know what they're going to be.
Oh, my God.
And we will look down, and we probably would have stopped MS by some kind of treatment given to young people, just like polio or whatever, that affects, say, EBV virus, another virus, or the microbiome. And in that sense, MS will be cured. So there's 3 cures: stop progression, which we're doing now; rebuilding, which we're learning to do but we don't have; and never having MS start. We're ready to start those trials.
Thank you. Next question for Dr. Voskuil. What are the best prospects for effectively treating smoldering MS?
I'm sorry, the best what?
Prospects?
Prospects. Smoldering MS. That's a great question. I really like recent work that's been done by Danny Reich's group at the NIH looking at the phase REM lesions. And we have many on the Race to Race MS panel that are interested in these lesions because, and we are too at UCLA, they're on the rims of the lesions and they are thought to be these activated microglia. So there's some immune, as Dr. Calabrese said, there are some immune cells in the brain that are unique and that they continue to cause damage. And so we at UCLA are looking at these phase REM lesions as a marker of what could lead to this progression and disability if they occur in that particular pathway. And one of the strategies we're using is we have a trial now using metformin treatment because there's some evidence that metformin can affect microglia from the work that we've done. And so we have a trial ongoing now for people they'll get metformin or they'll get placebo. And in contrast to some of the other studies going on around the country where they're looking at really young pediatric or very early populations, we're actually looking at older individuals because metformin has a lot of anti-aging properties, and we think the aging is associated with microglial activation and progression. And so, yeah, I think the chronic lesions are very important with respect to the physiology and also and it's affected by aging, so it kind of makes sense.
Thank you. I'll take the next question. I'm a parent of an adult son on Ocrevus. Is there another medication that works as well that doesn't hurt your immune system as much as Ocrevus? So the first thing I want to say is that Ocrevus changes your immune response but does not injure your immune system for the long term once you stop. So that's something we understand. There's been really a main concern during the pandemic with Ocrevus. Otherwise, there was no concern with higher risk of severe COVID infection. And if your son wants to stop because he feels that it's affecting his immune system in a way he doesn't want it to be, then there are other drugs that affect the immune system possibly less. And I will say maybe natalizumab, for example. So the next question is for Mark Barondes and Nancy, I think. I'm different than anyone. I have several autoimmune diseases. I can't use drugs, and I have foods that I can't eat. I have to do a holistic. Is there anyone who can help me?
Okay. I think we're all different. We all have different things that work for us. I probably have not taken the most traditional route with treating my MS because when I was diagnosed, there was no drugs on the market for a long time. And I learned to get better eating very healthy, taking tons of vitamins, and going to a homeopathic doctor. I think everybody owes it to themselves to get second opinions, find what's the best thing that works for you. It's never one size fits all. No two people have the same MS at all, and you have to sort of go by trial and error. It's a miracle that these drugs exist today, and it's important to find the right one that works correctly for you. Some people can't tolerate. I don't tolerate many medicines either. I kind of have an issue with that, but I've done really well with homeopathy, which I'm not all the doctors like that, but it works for me. So you have to find what empowers you to feel great.
So for me, I take a different approach. I think Randy's Donuts is what makes me feel better.
You know what? We should be serving those today. Actually, they'd make everyone feel better.
We should be. No, I think you have to find, you have to navigate your own path, whether it's donuts or whether it's vitamins or exercise. Do what makes you feel the best. Only you know. And just because somebody else disagrees and says, no, don't eat donuts, you can still do that if it does make you feel better. Sorry, Peter.
We're going to have to talk.
Do you write prescriptions for donuts? Yes.
Another question is, can you talk about any advancement in MS research that have benefited as a result of mRNA delivery technology that was developed during COVID? Short answer, because we're going to try to give our answers very short now so we can do all the questions. This is something that has been tested in mice, and in MS, probably at some point it will be tested. We just need to understand what's the target that this vaccine could have. Do you want to go with your questions?
Sure. I have several questions on stem cells in MS, and they're asking, are there advances? Are they good for secondary progressive MS? First off, there are a lot of different things that get wrapped into the bucket of stem cells, quote unquote. And there's different success levels with each of these different kinds. So there are mesenchymal stem cells. Sometimes these are things that are given through the nose or into the spinal canal. In general, those mesenchymal stem cells haven't had robust success. So generally, it's not something that I, as a doctor, recommend. What does work is a stem cell transplant, but that is effectively like a bone marrow transplant someone might get for cancer, so it's a big deal. You have to kill off your whole immune system and then let it reboot with the fresh stem cells. That does work for people with relapsing MS. It is in clinical trials to test whether that is better than the best medications available. So there are ongoing trials looking at stem cell transplants versus best available medications. And so definitely progress there. That treatment has been very successful in stopping all of the inflammation and kind of arresting MS. Some people do seem like they do somewhat better, but it is something that seems to do better for people in the earlier, more inflammatory stages of the disease. It has not been a resounding success for people with secondary progressive MS. And so the stem cells, as of right now, they seem to really well control the inflammatory aspect of the disease, but they're not recreating neurons that are lost. They're not recreating that. So that's kind of where stem cells are at present. Will it be available for secondary progressive MS within my lifetime? I'm reluctant to say it will be available for secondary progressive, but it may be available for some people with earlier stages of MS or rapidly progressive MS who aren't responding well to treatments that are drugs.
Thank you. Dr. Willis-Crabb, do you have any questions?
So I have two questions. The first one was specifically about ketogenic diet in MS. I think that there's a lot of different groups looking at a lot of different diets, so ketogenic is one of them, and the writer mentions the Ohio State trials. I think the challenge in looking at diet in MS is that it's difficult for anyone to stay on a diet for a meaningful amount of time, and sometimes these trials, in order to see how it modifies MS's disease, require data over multiple years. But it does seem like a ketogenic diet and potentially other diets like Mediterranean diets may help with especially symptoms like fatigue or depression, and they certainly can help control weight. I think that the ketogenic diet, there are some other considerations that really mean that you should probably talk to a doctor before starting some, like you can have kidney stones, or it can also impact the heart. So I think it's important to work with your physicians about understanding what kind of diet would be good for you. And in general, like Nancy said, it might be different for different people. Maybe some people, donuts are really the best way. But I think that I generally suggest, a diet that's high in fruits and vegetables and low in ultra-processed food, because that seems to be generally, bad for the brain. Our brains really shouldn't run on Hot Pockets. They should probably run on fruits and veggies. The second question that I have is about relapse treatments and alternatives specifically to Solumedrol. This writer had a good experience with Acthar gel, which is a very expensive therapy that kind of tickles the adrenal glands and helps them kind of put out hormones. But it is prohibitively expensive, and this person's insurance didn't cover it. I think that while we have a lot of therapies that we've talked about to help prevent future relapses, relapse treatment itself is really still, I think, focused on steroids. Now, I think at our clinic and maybe others are using more oral steroids if someone needs like an acute relapse treatment, which can really help accelerate and provide medications for people sooner. So oral prednisone, sometimes in high amounts, these can be hefty doses. But I think it's always worth considering, especially in the pandemic and thinking about infectious complications or long-term effects on bone health, et cetera, if steroids are even right for every relapse. I think that, and the most important cornerstone is being on a highly effective, the right therapy for you in the first place to help prevent these relapses. Thank you.
Thank you. So the short answers. Dr. Kaplan, you have questions in front of you.
So should we be worried about artificial intelligence? I'll try to be very quick. All conjecture, it's all anthropomorphizing, by which I mean it's what humans think computers would do, so the Terminator looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, not like a Tesla. And, as far as increasing IQ, and is there a risk just because the IQ is increasing? I think of Peter Calabrese, to me, IQ-wise, is my computer to my watch, and yet he's the nicest guy I know. So, there's no correlation there. And I would just, end with the idea that we're not doing such a great job as humans with all the things we have in front of us. So if you think about the enemy out there, I think we need some help, is one way to look at it.
Always hard to follow, Dr. Kaplan. So my question was, which MS researchers are working with AI today, and who should you keep your eye on? So I think the way to think about AI is it's a tool, and pretty much all researchers now are using some aspect of that. And that's because of the work that you heard about with the single cell RNA-seq, and even doing the imaging kind of analyses or using the electronic medical record. Enormous amounts of data that because we have now these new high-powered computers, computing power, that allows us to, and allows researchers to leverage those computational systems to ask and answer these questions. So I think really AI is everywhere. There and is being used in research, and you'll see that with the different departments at Cedars now. We have a computational biomedicine department that's really just focused on this infrastructure that we need. So again, think about it like a tool and not like a Tesla. Thank you.
Dr. Weiner, do you have any questions in front of you? You can. No.
No questions in front of
They
me.
have some.
So I have a question about the other diabetes drugs. You already heard about metformin, which is the oldest one, but what about Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro? So this is a great question. These are drugs that target a receptor called glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor, and they improve insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes. But lo and behold, as everyone knows, they're also associated with weight loss. So who doesn't want to lose weight? That seems like a great idea, right? Because drop some pounds and it's easier to get around and walk. And we know that carrying extra weight is actually pro-inflammatory. So this really, really makes a lot of sense. We did a study in our lab with one of the compounds called exenatide. And to our surprise, not only did the animals lose weight and do better, but it was very anti-inflammatory, not only in the spleen, which we can take out from the animals, but in the brain. So this needs to get done. Earlier this week, there was a meeting in Denver, the CMSC meeting, and there were a lot of companies there. And we actually talked to one of the companies about getting access to their medication. As you know, there's a shortage. Everyone wants to be on it. So we have to do a proper study, but this is going to get done. And I think it's an exciting target. We're planning to do it.
Dr. Voskuil?
Yeah, so a few here, I'll try to be brief. So what treatments are there for men that are aging with MS? Well, actually, men are interesting because men with MS have lower testosterone levels than men that don't have MS, and 27% actually meet the criteria for being below normal, and the other 60% actually live in the low normal range. Testosterone has a very wide range. It varies by day, and it decreases gradually from age 30 to age 70. But on top of that, MS patients, men with MS, tend to have even lower levels. And so the thing you can do is you can have your internist check your testosterone level and make sure that it's not in the for sure below normal, even in that low normal range. And so we've done trials, preclinical trials, preclinical studies, as well as trials in patients with men, and we put them into the mid to high normal range. So still in the normal range, but in the high normal range, so you're not testosterone deficient. And that's the one thing I would suggest for that. Second question is, how can I participate in the study for menopausal women? Just email me. It's first initial, last name, rvoskel@mednet.ucla.edu. You can put Nancy Davis in the subject line so I know that it's important. And I open those, like we all do. Just teasing, but yeah, she's very persuasive. So the third question is, so I'm young, but do I need to worry about my MS becoming progressive when I hit menopause? And this is exactly on target. So I work with a lot of, the Menopausal Society. There's a group of GYNs performing a menopausal care center at UCLA, but that's really the problem is women, even when they're even perimenopausal, starting with irregular periods, these things are already starting to happen at a very early age, and the hormonal community knows that the way to do this is to treat early and not late. And so women really need to be treated in the very earliest stages. This has also been shown by a study in MS. The very early stages are associated with more brain atrophy. The thing is to, I give the example of Alzheimer's where, once it's happened, it's very hard to repair and reverse. You really do need to come in as early as possible. And then you're more amenable, not only do you stop ongoing damage, but you're more amenable to repair when the damage is lighter as opposed to later stages of it. So yes, the answer is to get on it as soon as possible and to be on top of it. Moving right on to the fourth question, what do I recommend for living with MS to improve our health? And I would say that, I think it's important to optimize your hormonal status so you're not estrogen deficient or testosterone deficient, but I also am a proponent of, there's a lot of evidence for exercise, and I would like to say not only physical exercise, it increases some factors in the brain that are very protective, but also cognitive exercise. And so we're coming up with cognitive games to combine with, a hormone. And I think, if you don't lose it, you lose it. But the best example is if you think about the weightlifters. I mean, they're taking testosterone, they are exercising. Boy, what happens when they do both? And so I think that's the same thing with the brain and optimizing your hormonal state and also doing cognitive exercise. So putting both of those together would be ideal. And I have to go back to what Mark Barron said in the beginning. I mean, I think the best way to live our lives is that spirit is extremely powerful. So is, living healthy and hormones and exercise. But man, coming from inside, thousands of years, this has proved to be very important. So I think what he said was really affected me anyway. I think he's right. But last question, I mean, really, that's key. So the last thing is a really good question, and it's a big question for the MS field, and that is, do you recommend that patients who have progressed to secondary progressive, not relapsing anymore, should continue to be on disease-modifying therapies such as Ocrevus and Kesimpta? Why or why not? Huge question. I'm very... First of all, I want to put in context, when you optimize your hormonal status and when you exercise, these are things that are neuroprotective. They're not meant to replace taking DMTs. They're meant to be an add-on. Those treatments now target the peripheral immune responses. They're very effective. And these things I'm talking about is that holy grail of trying to target the brain and cause neuroprotection. Ideally, they should be both done. So it's an add-on therapy. Now, when you think about, so don't do one and just drop the other. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, some people do start to think, though, as they age and they're having less inflammation naturally, do they need to be on some of these strong DMTs? And it's very tricky, and I will tell you, if you do decide to do this with your neurologist, it has to be thought about a long time and discussed. And what we do is we discuss it, and what we'll do is say, if you do this, we're going to try it for 6 months, and we're going to get an MRI and see how you're doing, even if you're clinically fine, because we've got to really watch this, because it may just rear its ugly head when you go off these treatments, and lo and behold, you did have inflammation still. And so that's kind of the way we view it.
Thank you. Dr. Amesco, I think you have a
Yeah.
couple of questions.
Yep, so
Quick answer.
Great. A couple of questions related to having an abnormal gait and then developing some pain or some spasms. Well, first of all, anybody with an abnormal gait in the setting of MS, and whether it's new or worsening, it does need to be assessed. It can absolutely be related to an existing lesion, but it can also be related to new issues, perhaps due to compensatory mechanisms that have gone awry, meaning mechanical issues. And whether that there is treatment for pain to reduce it, absolutely. But it's best to characterize the pain first and understand what's happening. So I would say definitely at the individual level and seek out help with your doctor for that. So that's the fast answer for that. The second one relates to a study that is called the DISCO MS. And so this is a study that was done. It was a multi-site national study looking at discontinuation of therapy for multiple sclerosis in ages 55 and older. They needed to have been stable for at least 5 years, meaning no clinical relapses, no changes in MRI, no progression of disability. And the primary question was basically to see if the discontinuation of disease-modifying therapy was no worse than actually staying on therapy. The results are finally going to get published, but what we understand is that basically it might have not answered this primary question, but what we did learn was that in those that you discontinued, there was very little activity, such as relapses. And so maybe that goes back to, because the premise of this study is going back to the issue of immunosenescence and being, from multiple observational studies, particularly more 60 and older, that suggests that this, that you could stop disease-modifying therapy, but I would say everything, seek this, talk to your doctor first if this is being considered. And then the last question is related to, are there any studies or clinical trials of any for these underrepresented populations, such as Hispanic or Black patients? Absolutely. At USC, we have a huge biorepository as well as registry that you can participate, so please, feel free to email me, lmesco@usc.edu. And also, if you are not in California, we can put you in touch with other centers that are also looking at these populations, from genetics to immunophenotyping.
Thank you. I have a few questions about clinical trials. It will be very short. How to sign up for trials? The best thing is either you talk to your neurologist or you go online, you look at clinicaltrials.gov, which is set up by the NIH, and finds all the different types of trials ongoing, not only in the US, but also abroad. What cohorts does Coimbra protocol benefit, older versus younger? So this is something with very high dose vitamin D. Very high dose vitamin D can be dangerous for your health, so I would not suggest to engage in that. And regular dose of vitamin D doesn't seem to help prevent progression of MS. Last question on clinical trials. If someone enters the clinical trials, but their treatment is currently working well for them, what assurance do we have that the trial or the medication or placebo is not helping to diminish or slow down progression? So first, if you are doing well on treatment, I can guarantee you that you probably will not qualify to get in a trial, because the trials typically require that you have some relapses or some progression of the disease.
Thank you, doctors. Now, does anybody else have questions that have been unanswered? If not, we're going to conclude our forum and let Nancy say. Any benefit to taking B12?
Any benefit to taking B12, Dr. Syko?
Well, if your B12 levels are low, yes, absolutely. And some of the symptoms that people present with MS, like tingling or numbness, difficulty walking can be caused by B12 deficiency. So typically when you first come to be diagnosed, those levels are checked. But other than getting back into the normal range, there's no evidence that extra doses are required.
Thank you. So now in conclusion,
Wait, there's one more
Nancy
person.
Davis? Yeah.
Well, it depends on your pain, and we can certainly talk about it offline, and maybe.
Okay, thank you. All right, just a couple more, because we need to conclude this.
So the question is how the microbiome or the gut impacts MS. It's a big question. We know that the microbiome has all these bacteria, and they're very important. So they can impact MS on many ways. The bacteria can give out substances that can be good or bad for MS. They can affect the immune system, and they also communicate directly to the brain via the vagus nerve. So there's all those different ways.
Yes.
Hello, Nancy. Thank you so much for putting this symposium together. So incredibly valuable. I'd like to also compliment you all by being the best dressed, best looking doctors I've
Love that. The question is how do they dress so well? Right. They just have style.
So many of us, even if we have resources and even if we have connections, it seems that whatever symptom you come up with in any area, it could be a breast biopsy, it can be a symptom related to neurology. The second that you hear that you have anything, you start, again, this race. Oh my God, what do I do? Who do I go to? How do I get to an appointment? And, our records are all over the place in so many different areas. How is it that we take Nancy's model and then take it with advocacy as you've done as an attorney? And how do we take it and really synthesize it with this AI approach and all that so that, something manifests and we're not scrambling, trying to figure out where do we go, what do we do, who analyzes our records, how do we make sure we're not seen by an intern and somebody who actually knows what's going on. It's a very frightening, we all want to live. It's a very frightening thing to just, for anything to manifest and to not have a unified system, really as Nancy did in a microcosm in MS. How do we do it across the board and unite all these various systems so that we have Parkinson's together with MS and that we can finally start drawing these correlations of treatments? Where do we go?
So, I'm happy to just jump in and say that it is partly up to all of us as patients to be responsible. So what I tell myself, my family, and my patients is you want to have a 3-ring binder that has all of your studies, request them from the hospital, organized by the visits you've had, because when you come and see us, when we see you for consultation, that's when we're going to spend all of our time sort of visualizing everything that's going on with you. And you want that to be a time we have everything. Because if then it's like, okay, let's check an MRI, and now it's going to be a few weeks later, we're not going to have all of that information at our fingertips. When you go in to see your doctor, think ahead. What are the 3 questions that I really want? Not 10, because we'll never get through. And tell your physician, I have 3 questions. So when you're done at your computer, hopefully not too much time, make sure that you have that done. You can help us be better at what we do. As far as the technological revolution, we're moving in that direction. Epic is just one of many electronic health records that ties in with, other health records throughout the country. You're absolutely right. What we suck at is collaboration. I'll tell you plain and simple, it's because there's no money in it. So, you don't get paid for picking up the phone and calling, your colleague, that is changing. But, hopefully that's just some general pointers. And ChatGPT is a good way to, if you have all your data, you can feed it in there and it will summarize it for you. So.
Thank you, and that does conclude our forum today. So in conclusion, Nancy?
Thank you all, everybody, for being here today. It means so much to me and everybody who has MS. Thank you for this very prestigious panel of doctors and Mark Barendess and the donuts and all that kind of stuff. I think that it's so exciting to see where we are today. I remember being at this 30 years ago in Aspen, probably sitting right next to Dr. Weiner here, and there was no drugs. There was nothing available. And it was the hope that there would be things. They had done trials, and none of them had come up with anything significant. So to think that we're here today and there's such a lively conversation on what should work, what shouldn't work, which things have helped. I think the best advice is you have to go to your doctor. You have to get second opinions. And when you go to your doctor, you have to be armed with questions. Your doctor's not a fortune teller. He doesn't know everything going on with you. But I know when I go to a doctor, the week leading up to a doctor appointment or something, I write down all the questions I might have, because when I get there, I get very intimidated wearing some little flimsy, mask and gown, and you feel kind of intimidated, and you forget to ask, what you're there for. So as you were saying, Adam, it's so important to do that and document everything and have it there. And so grateful to everybody in the MS community for supporting us, and we are fast already planning the 31st annual Race to Race MS. I can't even imagine, but so grateful for everybody, and it's a miracle that we are where we are today, and it's nothing short of a miracle because of these incredible dream team of doctors. So thank you all for being here. Thanks.